Leading a transformative 7-year occupation, General Douglas MacArthur was instrumental in pacifying, democratizing, and revitalizing Japan post-World War II. Despite being bitter rivals during the war, America and Japan managed to transition from foes to arguably the closest and most trusted allies in the Asia-Pacific, during the Cold War and beyond. How did such an extraordinary shift occur? The journey from enemies to allies is remarkable. The unanticipated bombing of Pearl Harbor by Japan in December 1941 jolted America, formally plunging it into the war. Approximately 4 years later, the US released 2 catastrophic atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki in Japan, precipitating the end of the conflict. Following the war, America enforced a 7-year post-war occupation in Japan, decommissioning its military and drastically altering its political structure. However, America's post-war objective wasn't limited to achieving peace and rehabilitating Japan. Given the changing world order, the emergent superpower aimed to shape the historically influential, albeit small, Pacific Island nation into its Asian fortress against the spread of communism. Drawing on insights from post-World War I aftermath, American forces utilized Japan's desperate economic situation and disillusionment with its government and military to plant the roots of democracy and overhaul the constitution. Throughout this process, several thousand Japanese-American military intelligence linguists played as vital a role in the post-war transition, as they did secretly during the war. General Douglas MacArthur, who was the supreme commander of the Allied powers overseeing Japan's post-war transition, ensured Japan's emperor was spared from accountability. To prevent a severe famine in the ruined country, Americans airlifted food supplies to avert a humanitarian disaster and potential subsequent unrest. Rather than holding the aggressive Emperor Hirohito accountable for war crimes, the US tactically allowed him to retain his throne as a symbolic leader, thereby fostering a narrative that he was deceived by more militaristic factions during the war. By preserving the dignity of the nation's leader, the US administration under President Harry Truman believed it would enhance the likelihood of citizens cooperating with the occupation and the demanding task of transitioning from an ultra-nationalist imperial state to a democratic one. Sidney Mashbeer, a colonel in the Allied Translator and Interpreter Section, ATIS, of US military intelligence, advised MacArthur to refrain from humiliating the emperor by making him read a pre-prepared script. Instead, the emperor delivered a pre-recorded message, which tactfully didn't mention the term surrender. He suggested that Japan was opting for peace over a potentially catastrophic atomic-level war that could lead to human extinction. In facilitating Japan's evolution towards a democratic society, the US acknowledged the significance of public acceptance. The document detailing America's post-surrender policy for Japan emphasized that while it desired a government aligned with democratic principles, it wouldn't impose any form of governance on Japan not supported by its populace's freely expressed will. Despite the military government under MacArthur having extensive authority while supervising Japan's societal, economic, and cultural transition, it took measures to avoid the Japanese people feeling a loss of self-respect and self-confidence. The occupation teams operated in conjunction with the existing civil structure, endorsing local officials and citizens to initiate reforms as much as possible, while US forces oversaw the process. Although mutual animosity persisted, their respectful treatment of Japanese citizens was key in fostering trust and served their long-term objectives. Throughout World War II, America engaged a covert strategy, utilizing first-generation Japanese Americans, known as Nisei, as language experts for the military intelligence service in the Pacific Theater. The Nisei, offspring of Japanese immigrants, included those fluent in Japanese, particularly the Kibei, who had been sent to Japan for education before the war by their parents. As a potential clash with Japan loomed, the US recruited these Nisei to gather intelligence prior to Pearl Harbor. Post the attack and consequent confinement of Japanese descent Americans, these linguists served their country amid intensified discrimination and distrust. During the conflict, Nisei language experts eavesdropped on communications, translated maps and documents, and assisted in questioning enemy detainees. In 1944, General Charles Willoughby, the intelligence head under MacArthur, famously remarked that a single Attis language expert was worth one infantry battalion, estimating that Japanese-American linguists helped reduce the war duration by 2 years. These Nisei were pivotal during the Allied occupation and rebuilding of Japan. Over 5,000 served throughout the occupation, many as part of the military government teams allocated to each prefecture. The Kibei, due to their deep understanding of Japan's socio-political, cultural, religious, economic, educational, and practical norms, were particularly invaluable. In the initial months of the occupation, the Nisei and Kibei worked diligently behind the scenes on several complex objectives. They facilitated the repatriation of American and Allied war prisoners and the return of Japanese soldiers and civilians living abroad to Japan. They were involved in freeing political detainees, seeking war criminals, and collecting evidence for their trials. They watched for signs of resistance that could undermine Japan's democratic transition. Economically, they aided in dismantling Japan's war-related industries and worked towards breaking up financial conglomerates, wartime black markets, and organized crime. Reconstructing Japan's constitution of major significance, the Nisei Kibei aided in drafting Japan's new constitution. Effective from May 3, 1947, and containing around 103 articles, it introduced comprehensive changes, including land reform, women's right to vote, protection of free speech, assembly, and religion, establishment of labor unions, and the initiation of U.S.-style education systems. A critical component of the new constitution was Article 9, where Japan denounced military aggression, stating its commitment to an international peace based on justice and order, and renouncing war and the threat or use of force to settle international disputes. It also expressed the resolve not to maintain land, sea, and air forces, or any other potential for war, and not to acknowledge the right of the state to wage war. In the subsequent years, as the geopolitical landscape in the Pacific and elsewhere shifted, this article has sparked debates in Japan and other countries. Yet, the Constitution has remained unamended.